Hey there, thanks for joining me on Tropical Weather Impact. It is Tuesday, September the 2nd. We are heading into the busiest month of hurricane season. I'm meteorologist Peyton Malone. We're here in New Orleans checking in on everything going on out in the Atlantic Basin. And the peak of the season, it is coming officially. It's around September the 10th. We are fairly quiet right now, but we are tracking an area that we do think will become our next depression and named storm. And also, no threats to the U.S. for now. And so while we are watching an area trying to form out in the Atlantic, we don't have any immediate concerns, at least for anything significant, for the Atlantic Basin or for the United States right now. So here's an overview of what the National Hurricane Center is watching. They've got this tropical wave far out in the Atlantic. They are now giving that a high chance of becoming our next named storm. Now, closer to home, something we will keep an eye on. I don't think it's going to do anything major, but it's this old frontal boundary. We've got a big burst of showers and storms in the northern Gulf this morning. We also have a lot of disturbed weather. Look at all this over the Bahamas, down towards Cuba. It's possible we do see some weak low pressure forming somewhere in this general vicinity over the next couple of days, but I don't think it's going to develop into anything substantial. It's just extra rain in the Gulf waters and down towards the Bahamas, some extra rain. So that's what we're watching a little bit closer to home here. Now, this is the feature we do think will become our next named storm, maybe our second hurricane of the 2025 season. It's not organized this morning. This area of disturbed weather is going to try to organize in the coming days. We are giving it a better chance of organizing by the end of this week and into early next week. Now, the current path of this sends it basically west through the rest of this week. Now, if we are going to have a storm or depression down here, we are talking about by early next week somewhere in here. Now, what that means is that areas like Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, they'll need to watch this a bit closer than the rest of the Atlantic Basin. The question right now is if something does form, when does the turn happen? There are some models that bring systems a bit closer to the islands by by the middle of next week. There are also many guidance that suggests an out to sea, and there are opportunities for this system, if it does develop, to go out to sea. Again, we've got a long time to watch this one to make sure it actually does that turn. There are some that move it further north out to sea faster. There are some solutions that move it a bit closer to the islands, again, by the middle of next week. Whenever you look at our GFS and European models, your GFS in red, the European model in green, you can see there they show that unorganized system coming together ever so slowly as we go into the end of this week. Here we are Friday, here we are Saturday. Now the GFS has been a bit more aggressive with it strengthening faster and also turning to the north faster. And so I think it's feasible that if we do have something trying to spin up a bit faster, it would probably hook it out to sea sooner. Now there's also some scenarios like the GFS or the European in green here that's a bit slower with it developing, and it gets a bit further off to the west here, closer to the island. So here we are. You can see the models really start to diverge by here we are next Tuesday morning. Around a week from now, the European model has a weaker unorganized system organizing and trying to pull north closer to the islands. The GFS again is already out to sea with that solution. And so we'll wait and see how it plays out. A lot of this will depend on how quickly or how much this system actually tries to organized. So if we have a hurricane out here, it's probably curving. If we have a weak tropical wave or tropical depression, it may get a bit closer there to the islands by the middle of next week. So again, we've got 7 days to monitor this. So when you look at the steering currents, what we're looking at this time of year, we're getting these frequent troughs of low pressure, and these are your routes out to sea. This is why a lot of times anything this far out in September wants to turn out to sea. It's very difficult to get a storm this far out in the Gulf waters. It can happen, but it's difficult. So what it's going to do here in the near term, it's riding around this ridge of high pressure. But look, as we go into the weekend, there's the ridge still strong, but you can still see we still have this trough digging down over the eastern U.S. There's some of these shortwave troughs digging across the U.S. as well. And so those are your opportunities to weaken the ridge and allow things to start to turn. And so we'll just be watching this closely. Luckily, this ridge is not centered over the United States like we sometimes see in August. That's when you get problems. When your ridge extends further off in the U.S., that's how you get a system in the Gulf from way out here. This type of setup, I like that because it tells me that there is an opportunity for this to curve out to sea. It's worth the mention, this is a long ways out. We're going to watch it until it makes this turn. We're going to watch it until it's long gone. But that's what we're seeing right now with the long-range patterns. We like what we're seeing. It's worth that mention. Again, it's way out here. I mean, if this thing ever were to get close to the United States, it would be in probably 2 weeks. 10 to at least 14 days. And so that's why you shouldn't be stressing about this. We've been talking about things like this all hurricane season. And so not every system is something to stress about. Most are not something to stress about. But that's where we stand right now. And overall, things have been fairly inactive for the beginning of September. I mean, it's heading into the peak of the season here, and we're not even tracking a named storm right now. And so we'll count that as a win. So far, we have had one hurricane, Erin. It was a major hurricane. It was a Category 5 hurricane. Then Fernand, it's long gone. Next name on the list is Gabrielle, Umberto, Imelda. Now you may be looking at this list going, how are we going to check off all these names? How are we going to have an above average season? Well, it's still only early September. September is the busiest month. Now the 10th is around the official peak of the season. Depends on what stat you look at, but think of it the second week of September as the busiest part of the season. All of September is active though. October often gets overlooked too. And the past couple of seasons, October has taught us that we can often have these backloaded seasons. And what'll be interesting is to see is, are we seeing a shift in when hurricane season is most active? And when we look at this graphic in the next 30 years, are we going to see everything shifted towards the end of the season? It's far too soon to say, obviously, but maybe we are seeing some shifts with how the tropics work in the Atlantic Basin. But I just want to remind you that October is still very much a wait and watch game too. Now, the end of October, things typically are winding down along the northern Gulf. November in New Orleans and Texas, we're usually fine. It's Florida and parts of the East Coast that have to watch things a bit further into the season here. But once we get into the colder months and the cooler months, these big cold fronts, these big troughs of low pressure are coming down, and they're usually helping us out. But again, that's usually not until the end of October and heading into November. So let's just sit back and enjoy the peace and quiet while we have it, because hurricane season is far from over. Now, let's go back in history. On this day, we have a lot of this time of year anniversaries of significant storms people remember. I was going back and looking, 1985, 40 years ago, which is wild. We had some wild storms that year, and we had two storms specifically that if it was happening today, I just cannot imagine how insane the internet would go with tracking these. Let's start with Elena. Hurricane Elena made landfall in Biloxi as a Category 3 on September 2nd, 1985. It was a major hurricane. But before it made landfall, it was a nightmare to forecast all along the Gulf Coast, from Louisiana to Florida. At one point, we had hurricane warnings from southeast Louisiana all the way down to Sarasota because we didn't know where Elena was going to end up going. So what happened here was the storm was getting pulled to the north. There was a trough of low pressure, the ridge was weakened, and a cold front was coming down. Well, that cold front came in and Elena began to stall. As it began to stall, it meandered for like 2 days off the Florida coast, just battering the Florida coast with wind and some waves and some rain. Now, at that point, they were thinking, okay, it's going to try to go inland into Florida. Well, it stalled out, and that ridge of high pressure started to build back in. And what it do? Well, it detoured and said, okay, I'm going to go up towards Biloxi, Mississippi, and that's exactly where it made landfall on September the 2nd. But it was just a nightmare for days and days and days. They really didn't have a solid idea on where Elena was going to go. Now, in today's day and age, a slow-moving storm is still a nightmare to forecast. It's very, very hard to pinpoint a slow-moving storm because they are often doing erratic motions, and there's so many variables. There's just not a lot of movement in the atmosphere. And so that's unbelievable. I was obviously not around to experience this, but just looking at some of the meteorological data and all the facts here with it, that is a wild storm in 1985. That would still be one of the biggest headaches to forecast in 2025. Now, 1985 didn't end with Elena being a weird storm. Hurricane Juan happened in late October. This was a late October hurricane for Louisiana, one of the latest on records until Hurricane Zeta in 2020, which was a Category 3. Now, Juan came up to the north here briefly. It made landfall as a tropical storm, did a loop, steering currents collapsed, went back south, strengthened into a hurricane, did another loop, came along the coast. It skirted basically the entire Louisiana coast for days, and then made another landfall. I think it made 3 landfalls right along the coast or right along the mouth of the river here, and then finally moved inland as a tropical storm. But what a nightmare that storm was to forecast as well. Just a month, nearly 2 months later after Hurricane Elena. And so just going back in history there with two of the wilder storm tracks we have seen. Now, we've had some weird storms do some loops. Betsy is a good example of a storm that did something wild out here, did a loop, and then came back down through the Gulf. And so we always use that rule of thumb that if a storm is slowing down and expected to stall, you got to watch that thing until it is either gone, dissipated, or way up in the North Atlantic, because there have been storms that come up north, do a loop, and then come back. And so we just watch these things until they are long gone. And if you've experienced any of these wild storms, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But that's where we stand as of right now. There are no Elenas or Juans in the Gulf or the Caribbean or the Atlantic. We do think Gabrielle is going to be trying to form at least here in the next 5 to 7 days. I think we could have a named storm out there, but it's so far out there that we're not stressed about it right now. We're going to have your updates all week long here as we inch closer and closer to the peak of hurricane season. But for now, enjoying it being nice and quiet. We'll see you right back here at the same time, same place tomorrow.